There's some people in the media left insisting there is something racist about 5 Memphis cops beating to death a black man, Tyre Nichols, even though the 5 police who've been charged with murder are all black in a police force that has a black female chief. Now, Tyre Nichols was stopped by those police for supposed reckless driving, but then ran away. The police caught him, punched him and kicked him so badly that he died 3 days later. I'm going to show you the vision. Now, to me, this death is more horrific than even the killing of George Floyd that had Black Lives Matter protesters set fire to so many cities. For one, Floyd was not beaten to death, but died when a police officer recklessly restrained him with a now banned technique. A knee near Floyd's neck, the coroner say, killed him. But white cop, black victim, that story is always going to sell better in the media and to rioters on the streets. And that explains perhaps the weird coverage of this latest death of Tyre Nichols. With headlines like this, Tyre Nichols' death shows black cops can also be faces of white supremacy. Well, that's really trying. And in Forbes, 5 black Memphis cops upheld institutional and cultural racism in Tyre Nichols' murder. And this in the New York Times, Tyre Nichols' beating opens a complex conversation on race and policing. And when they say complex, I mean, it's actually hard to argue this is racist, but boy, they're going to give it a try. And they're doing the same here. They're also trying on the ABC. Here's Patricia Karvelis of the ABC today. And again, with that word, complex.
Yeah, it is complex because they were all black, as you say. Does that actually change then the racial dimension to this story, or can policing still be racist even if it's perpetrated by black officers?
Joining me from London is a writer and broadcaster, a new regular on this show, Esther Cracker. Esther, thank you so much for your time. Does that make sense?
Thank you for having me.
These five black police are actually the faces of white supremacists.
Yes, it's a very interesting assertion, and this is why sort of the media has kind of bent over backwards really to try and explain in a way that's more understandable for the public. But there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on here. The idea that this man, the victim, who was killed by these 5 black police officers, is now a victim of institutional racism, doesn't really kind of contextualize the situation in the US with regards to policing and with regards to race and demographics and instances of police brutality. So for instance, painting this idea that because the victim is black, then it's automatically a form of racism doesn't square up with what happens when the victims are white, or the fact that statistics show that white Americans are far more likely to be victims of police brutality than black Americans when you actually sort of even out in terms of demographics and in terms of the actual prevalence of crimes and all of that committed by different demographic groups. And I think that's mainly the problem I have with the media coverage on this, because it kind of posits just one truth, which is it is institutional racism, even though statistics kind of show a different story. And also you have to contextualize it in how modern American society is now. America is no longer just a black versus white sort of society like it was 70 to 80 years ago. You have Hispanic communities now that are easily becoming the largest minority in the US. What about Asian Americans? How do you square up sort of with crime demographics and police brutality cases with those groups of people? I even make the point that when you sort of look at black Africans in the US and you take that picture as a form of kind of describing black America, you often paint a very different picture than sort of black Americans as in sort of black Americans that have been in the US that are descendants of slaves, right? Because black Americans, particularly Nigerian Americans, tend to out-earn a lot of their black counterparts and even white American counterparts. Crime statistics and police brutality statistics with those communities are completely different, but they still make up a part of black America. So I think the main issue here is, the media doesn't contextualize these things, and then, when obviously the cognitive dissonance becomes too clear for them to ignore, they just say this is complex, and you get high priests of critical race theory coming to say this is complex, then leave it to us experts to explain it to you.
What offends me though about all that is the racism here, because to me it says that if you've got a police chief that's been there, I think, 7 years or something, and she's had plenty of time to reform the force, and you've got these police officers, what you're saying by saying, oh, they're just the face of white supremacy, you're denying them agency. You're just saying, oh, they're just pawns of a society they don't understand. They're helpless victims of a white, racist system that they cannot even change. I mean, really, that's infantilizing people.
Yeah, and it's completely infantilizing. It's also extremely inaccurate. And it really, I think what bothers me the most is it doesn't get to the heart of the issue. We should be in the business of solutions. How do we stop situations like this from happening? We know that police training and even funding for different police forces in the US varies very widely. So you have some very, very well-trained police officers that wouldn't even think of doing this. And you have very poorly trained police officers. There's an emphasis on community policing to try and build trust. But how do you build trust with community policing, even if people look like you are brutalizing you in this way? So it's quite a nuanced conversation, but not in the way that the media is portraying it. And one of the things that they say to tackle this is through unconscious bias training. However, the evidence to show that unconscious bias training actually works is very limited, because it assumes that people can't just do bad things because they're bad people. Murderers don't murder because they happen to forget murder is illegal. They're just bad people that do bad things. And a lot of the times, we have to be in the business of solutions and actually using specific language that's actually representative of the situation and contextualizes things, and not just throwing words out like white supremacy as if the black police chief had no agency with regards to training and various aspects of the police force. I think that's completely unhelpful.
No, it's just ramming a theory to fit the facts. Esther, to a cultural craziness in Britain that you've been looking at. I mentioned last week how a Scottish man charged with raping 2 women then claimed he was actually a transgender woman before he got to court, even though the bulge in his pants said something extremely different to that story. And yet this man, called a woman in the media, was actually sent to a women's jail until there was an uproar. And if that wasn't bad enough, we then learned that another Scottish man convicted of stalking a girl and assaulting women was also claiming to be transgender and was also being sent to a women's prison. What does this tell you?
It tells us that the world has gone mad. And it's been very clear in Nicola Sturgeon's response that this is something that people are not going to tolerate much longer. I mean, the extent to the lunacy is the fact that during Isla Fisher's trial, that's the name that the allegedly trans-identifying prisoner that raped 2 women goes by. The prosecutor had to say that she raped those 2 women with her penis in front of the victims. I mean, can you imagine how mortifying it is to have been a victim of such a crime and then to have the prosecution sit there trying to be respectful to the pronouns to the man that vilely raped you? It's completely baffling.
It is. That's the whole thing about this, Esther. I mean, it just forces people to be little liars in even their language. I mean, they know that it's a con, but you're forced to stand up and pay homage with these little lies.
Yep. And I mean, it's clear that there are some people that are gaming the system because this is how crazy things have become. I mean, it's important to point out that 42% of all trans-identifying prisoners are actually in prison for sexual assault crimes. So, there is that statistic does show that there are people that are willing to game the system because they know that by identifying as a different gender, for instance, they will end up in a prison that has a looser, more relaxed culture.
That is a bizarre stat. I thank you for it, Esther Crackley. I thank you for that. We'll see you next week.